They left her in the snow the night she turned 18. No wolf, no pack, no name worth speaking. Sable Ashwood had survived the cruelest winter the Northern Reach had ever seen by doing the one thing no wolfless Omega was supposed to be capable of. She refused to die. When she found the first wolf, broken, frostbitten, barely breathing beneath a collapsed pine, she didn't hesitate. She built a fire. She bled her own warmth into its fur. She didn't know that act of mercy would ignite a war, expose a conspiracy, and drag her straight into the arms of the most powerful alpha alive. The lantern had been her mother's. Sable Ashwood held it by its copper handle, the glass cracked along one side where her father had thrown it against the cabin wall the night he discovered the truth about her. No wolf, no shift, no worth. The crack ran diagonally from bottom to top, a thin fracture that split the light into two beams whenever she lit the candle inside. One golden, one pale, as if even light couldn't decide what to make of her. She lit it now, standing at the edge of the Thornveil Forest, and watched her breath crystallize in the dark. The Northern Reach was dying. 3 weeks of unbroken snowfall had buried the mountain passes, collapsed the eastern watchtower, and frozen the river Ashenmere solid enough to walk across. The Silverpine pack, her pack, though they'd never claim her, had retreated into the Hearthstone Lodge, locking the great iron doors against the storm. Everyone accounted for, everyone safe. Except Sable. She hadn't expected them to count her. The last census, taken at the autumn equinox, when the pack gathered beneath the Hearthstone's great oak to recite their lineage, had listed her as non-affiliated dependent, wolfless. 3 words that erased 18 years of existence. The census taker, a wiry beta named Halden, hadn't even looked up when he wrote them. Sable had watched his quill scratch across the parchment and felt something small and necessary die inside her chest. Not hope, exactly, but the ghost of hope. The memory of a time when she had still believed someone might see her. Wolfless Omegas didn't get counted. They got tolerated sometimes. They got used for washing, for carrying, for absorbing the frustration of betas who needed something beneath them. And when winter came, when food ran low and tempers ran high, they got forgotten. The snow was knee-deep by the time she reached the first ridge. Her boots, hand-stitched from leather scraps she'd bartered for with 3 weeks of kitchen labor, leaked at the seams, and the cold climbed her shins like something alive. The lantern swung with each step, casting its fractured light across the white expanse, and Sable kept her eyes fixed on the tree line ahead. She'd heard the howling an hour ago, not the proud, territorial howls of a pack on patrol. These were ragged, desperate, the sound of wolves in pain. The sound had threaded through the walls of the storage shed where she slept, pulled her upright on her straw pallet, and wrapped around her ribs like a fist. No one else had gone out. She'd checked. The Silverpine wolves were warm behind their iron doors, and whatever was dying out there in the storm was not their concern. But Sable had never been good at letting things die. She found the first wolf beneath a shattered pine, half buried in snow and bark. A massive gray creature, its fur matted with ice, one foreleg bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Its breathing was shallow. She could see the faint rise of its ribs, slow and labored, like a bellows with a hole in it. Sable set the lantern down. The fractured light spilled across the wolf's face, and she saw its eyes, amber, glassy, barely tracking. It didn't growl. It didn't snap. It just watched her with the resigned patience of a creature that had already decided it was going to die. "No," Sable whispered. "Not tonight." She stripped off her outer coat, the one she'd patched 11 times since autumn, and draped it across the wolf's torso. Her hands moved with a sureness she didn't question, checking the broken leg, clearing ice from its muzzle, pressing her palms against its chest to feel for the heartbeat beneath. It was there, faint, stubborn, like hers. She gathered dead wood from beneath the snow, her fingers already numb, and built a fire in the hollow of the fallen pine. The flames caught slowly, sputtering and hissing against the damp, but they held. Sable fed them patiently, stick by stick, until the heat began to push back the cold in a small, trembling circle. The wolf's eyes found the lantern. Something shifted in them, a flicker of awareness, almost recognition. But Sable was already looking past it, deeper into the forest, because the howling hadn't stopped. And it wasn't one wolf. Sable picked up her mother's lantern, its cracked glass throwing twin beams into the swirling dark, and walked deeper into the Thornveil. The cold bit through her remaining layers like teeth, but she didn't turn back. She could feel the temperature dropping, not gradually, but in sudden, vicious increments, as if the mountain itself were exhaling cold. Her fingers had passed numb and entered the territory beyond it, where sensation became a distant rumor. But the howling continued, threading through the trees like a wounded prayer, and Sable followed it because that was what she did. She followed the sounds that others chose not to hear. She walked toward the pain that others walked away from. She never turned back. That was both her greatest strength and the thing that would almost destroy her. By dawn, she had found them all. 15 wolves scattered across nearly 2 miles of frozen forest. Some alone, some in clusters of 2 or 3, huddled together in the hollows between root systems, their bodies pressed tight against each other in a desperate bid for warmth that was failing. Every one of them was injured. Broken bones, deep gashes that had frozen mid-bleed, the telltale blue tinge of frostbite creeping along ears and paws. Sable worked through the night with a methodical focus that bordered on mechanical. She built 7 fires. She splinted 3 legs using strips torn from her own clothing and straight branches snapped from dead birches. She packed wounds with pine resin and snow-cleaned moss, the old remedies her mother had taught her before the sickness took her voice, and then the rest of her. Her mother's lantern sat at the center of each makeshift camp, its cracked light a small golden heartbeat in the crushing dark. The wolves watched her. That was the part that unsettled her. Not the cold, not the exhaustion that had turned her muscles to lead. Not even the gnawing awareness that she was burning through her body's reserves with nothing to replenish them. It was the watching. 15 pairs of eyes tracking her every movement with an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. Shifters, she realized, sometime around the 11th wolf. These were shifters. The understanding should have stopped her. Shifters were pack. Shifters had territory, hierarchy, laws. Helping a strange shifter, touching one without permission, was a violation that could get a wolfless omega killed in some packs. The Silverpine elders would call it presumption. The betas would call it something worse. But the 12th wolf was a juvenile, barely more than a pup, and it was shivering so violently that its small body blurred at the edges. Sable gathered it against her chest without hesitation, wrapping her arms around it, pressing her cheek to the top of its head. Its fur was like frozen silk, silver-white, finer than anything she'd touched, and beneath it, she could feel the terrified hammering of a heart too young to understand what was happening. The pup smelled like milk, and pine sap, and fear, and something about that combination, the innocence of it, the smallness, broke through every wall Sable had spent years building. "Shh," she murmured. "I've got you. You're safe." The pup whimpered once, then went still against her, not dead still, but the deep, trusting stillness of a creature that had decided to believe her. It was the 15th wolf that nearly broke her. She found him in a ravine at the far edge of the Thornveil, where the forest dropped sharply toward the frozen river. He was the largest wolf she had ever seen. Black-furred, massive through the chest and shoulders, built like something designed to end arguments. A deep wound ran along his left flank, crusted with frozen blood, and his breathing came in a harsh, irregular rhythm that spoke of cracked ribs. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Gold. Not amber, not yellow. Gold, like molten metal poured into a mold and set burning. They found her through the snow and held her with an intensity that made every instinct she possessed fire at once. Something inside her chest, something deep, something she'd never felt before, lurched. Sable staggered. The sensation was like a hook behind her sternum, pulling her forward, pulling her toward him. Her skin prickled. Her blood warmed despite the cold, and for one wild, impossible second, she felt a presence at the edge of her consciousness, vast, ancient, unmistakably wolf. Then it was gone. Sable stood in the snow, panting, her fractured lantern swinging from numb fingers, and stared at the black wolf. He stared back. Something passed between them, not words, not thought, but something older than both. A recognition. She shook her head. Wolfless. She was wolfless. Whatever that had been, it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. She knelt beside him and pressed her hands to his wounded flank. The blood had frozen in a dark, glassy sheet, and beneath it, she could feel the heat of infection beginning to build. Bad. This was bad. "Stay with me," she said, not knowing why she was talking to him like he could understand. "I didn't walk 2 miles in a blizzard to lose you in a ditch." The black wolf made a low sound, not a growl, not a whine, something in between, something that sounded impossibly like acknowledgement. Sable built her 7th fire in the ravine, bigger than the others, and worked on his wound until her hands were red to the wrists. She packed it, stitched the deepest part with a bone needle and thread pulled from her hem, and laid her coat, the one she'd already given away once and retrieved from the first wolf once it stabilized, across his massive frame. Then she sat beside him in the snow, lantern between her knees, and watched the fire. She was out of clothing to sacrifice, out of energy. The cold was inside her now, not just on the surface, but deep in her core, a slow, patient predator that knew how to wait. Sable closed her eyes. She thought of her mother's lantern, its light split in two. She thought of the pup against her chest, its heart hammering, choosing to trust her. She thought of gold eyes in the dark. The black wolf shifted, physically, painfully, until his massive body pressed against her side. The heat of him, even through his injuries, was staggering, like leaning against a furnace. Sable let herself lean into it. Somewhere far away, she heard the first wolf howl, not in pain this time, but in something that sounded like a summons. She woke to warmth and voices. Not the low, rough voices of the silverpine betas who sometimes kicked her straw pallet to rouse her for dawn chores. These voices were different, deep, layered with authority, speaking in clipped tones that carried the unmistakable cadence of command. Sable opened her eyes and found herself inside a tent. Not a silverpine tent. This was military canvas, heavy, waxed, stretched over a frame of iron poles. Furs lined the floor. A brazier burned in the corner, filling the small space with dry, cedar-scented heat. Someone had changed her wet clothes. She was wearing a linen shirt 3 sizes too large, and wrapped in a wolf fur blanket that probably cost more than the storage shed she slept in. Her mother's lantern sat on a trunk beside the cot. Someone had cleaned it. The crack in the glass was still there, but the copper handle had been polished until it gleamed. Sable sat up, and every muscle in her body screamed. The tent flap opened, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, unreasonably tall, with dark hair cut short and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountain. His eyes were gray, sharp, assessing. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jawline, white against bronze skin, and the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, each step placed with predatory economy, told her what he was before he opened his mouth. Beta, a high-ranking one. "You're awake," he said. Not a question. Sable pulled the blanket higher. "Where am I?" "Ashenmere Camp. You've been unconscious for 14 hours. He studied her with the detached precision of someone cataloging a list. "My name is Ronan. I serve the Crown Pack." The Crown Pack. Sable's blood went cold. Every wolf in the northern reach knew the Crown Pack. They were the royal line, the Alpha King's own, the largest, most powerful pack in the 7 territories. Their word was law. Their displeasure was death. And they had been absent from the north for over a decade, ever since the old king died, and his son took the throne. "The wolves I found," Sable said carefully. "They're yours." Ronan's expression didn't change. "They are. 15 of the king's own guard, ambushed during a northern patrol. You kept them alive." Something in his tone, a faint note beneath the military flatness, sounded almost like respect. Sable didn't trust it. "I need to go back," she said. "The Silverpine Pack will notice I'm missing." Ronan's mouth twitched. "They haven't. We checked." The words landed like a slap, but Sable kept her face still. Of course they hadn't noticed. "Of course. Regardless," she said, "I should return before the king wishes to thank you personally." Sable stopped. The king. The Alpha King of the 7 territories wanted to speak to her, a wolfless, packless, nameless Omega who slept in a storage shed and owned exactly 1 cracked lantern and a pair of leaking boots. She should have said no. Every survival instinct she'd honed over 18 years of invisibility was screaming at her to refuse, to slip back into the snow and the silence and the safety of being no one. But the hook in her chest, the one she'd felt in the ravine, staring into gold eyes, pulled. "All right," she said. It was the biggest mistake of her life. Ronan led her through the camp, and Sable tried not to stare. The Ashenmere Camp was a small city of canvas and iron, populated by wolves who moved with the coiled readiness of soldiers. They watched her pass with open curiosity, a few with hostility, most with a blank, evaluating attention that made her skin crawl. She could feel them scenting her, testing her, finding nothing. The absence of a wolf scent was its own kind of signature, a blank space where identity should have been. Among shifters, scent was everything: rank, lineage, emotional state, sexual maturity, even truthfulness. A wolf could lie with words, but scent never lied. And Sable's scent said nothing at all. She was a silence in a world built on sound, and the soldiers of the Crown Pack reacted to that silence the way all predators reacted to anomalies, with suspicion that hadn't yet decided whether to become hostility. Wolfless. The word followed her like a shadow. The king's tent stood at the center of the camp, larger than the others, marked by a banner she recognized from the old histories. A black wolf on a field of silver, the crown of the 7 territories woven in gold thread above its head. Ronan held the flap open. Sable stepped inside and stopped breathing. The man standing beside the map table was not what she expected. He was younger, late 20s, maybe, with black hair that fell across his forehead and a face that managed to be both beautiful and brutal at the same time. Broad shoulders, a warrior's build beneath clothing that was finer than anything she'd ever touched. A bandage wrapped his left side, visible where his shirt hung open. The wound she'd stitched. The cracked ribs she'd felt beneath her hands. But it was his eyes that confirmed it. Gold. Molten, burning, impossible gold. The black wolf. The 15th wolf in the ravine. He was the Alpha King. Sable's knees didn't buckle. She'd trained herself out of that years ago. But something inside her chest cracked open like the glass of her mother's lantern, and the hook behind her sternum pulled so hard she thought it would tear her in half. The king stared at her, and in his gold eyes she saw the same recognition she'd felt in the snow. His name was Kael Voss, and he smelled like wood smoke and iron and something deeper, something ancient that Sable's body recognized even if her mind refused to. "You," he said. One word. It hit her like a physical force, the Alpha command vibrating beneath it, not directed at her, not intentional, but leaking out like heat from a cracked furnace. The wolves outside the tent would have felt it. Every shifter in a mile radius would have felt it. Sable felt nothing. Or rather, she felt everything except the compulsion to obey. She felt the tug in her chest, the warmth spreading through her veins, the almost unbearable awareness of his presence. But the Alpha command slid off her like water off stone, because she had no wolf to command. Kael's eyes narrowed. He took a step toward her, and Sable held her ground, not out of courage, but because her body had decided, without consulting her, that it was not going to move away from this man. "You're the one who found us," he said. His voice was low, rough, like gravel dragged across velvet. "You treated my guard. You stitched my wound." His hand moved to his bandaged side. "With a bone needle." "I didn't have a proper one," Sable said. Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. It disappeared quickly, replaced by something more intense. He inhaled, slowly, deliberately, and Sable watched his pupils blow wide. "Mate," he breathed. The word detonated in the space between them. Ronan, standing by the tent flap, went rigid. Outside, a wolf snarled. Somewhere in the camp, someone dropped something heavy. Sable didn't understand, or she did, but the understanding was so enormous, so fundamentally restructuring, that her mind simply refused to process it. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice sounded very far away. "I'm wolfless." "I know what you are." Kyle's jaw was tight, his gold eyes blazing with something that looked like fury and wonder in equal measure. "I can feel it. My wolf has been howling your name since you touched me in that ravine." "I don't have a name," Sable whispered. "Not one that matters." Kael flinched. It was small, a micro-expression, there and gone, but she caught it. And in that flinch, she saw something she hadn't expected from the most powerful Alpha in the 7 territories. Pain. "Everyone out," he said. The command was absolute. Ronan left without a word. The tent emptied in seconds, and then it was just the two of them, the brazier crackling and the impossible truth hanging in the air like smoke. Kael sat down heavily on the edge of the map table. The movement pulled at his wound, and Sable saw him grit his teeth. "Sit," he said. Then, catching himself, "Please." She sat on the trunk beside her mother's lantern, and her hand found the copper handle instinctively. The metal was warm from the brazier. "The mate bond," Kael said slowly, "doesn't care about wolves. It doesn't care about rank or pack or whether you can shift. It's older than all of that." He ran a hand through his hair, and Sable noticed his fingers were trembling. The Alpha King's fingers were trembling. "I thought mine was broken. There were years. I'd given up." Sable watched him. This man who commanded armies, who wore a crown, who could bring a wolf to its knees with a word. And she saw what the gold eyes and the broad shoulders and the royal bearing were designed to hide. A loneliness so vast it had its own gravity. She recognized it. She lived in the same country. The geography of isolation was the same, regardless of whether you were a king surrounded by 10,000 wolves or an Omega alone in a storage shed. The terrain was identical. Vast. Empty. Echoing with the footsteps of people who had walked through your life without stopping. Sable knew every ridge and valley of that landscape, and seeing it mapped across the face of the most powerful man alive didn't diminish it. If anything, it made it worse. Because at least her loneliness had been imposed from outside. His had been built from within, brick by brick, by a crown that demanded he be everything to everyone and nothing to himself. "Your guard," she said, because the silence was becoming dangerous. "The 15 wolves. What happened to them?" Kael's expression hardened. "An ambush. Coordinated. Someone within the northern packs leaked our patrol route. We were hit by a force 3 times our number and driven into the storm. The blizzard did the rest." "Who?" "I don't know. Yet." The gold eyes found hers, and beneath the royal authority, she saw the wolf, patient, relentless, already hunting. "But I will." Sable looked down at her lantern. The crack in the glass caught the firelight, splitting it into 2 beams, one golden, one pale. "The Silverpine Pack," she said quietly. "Their alpha, Gregor Thorn, has been consolidating territory all winter. The storms gave him cover. He's moved border markers, absorbed 2 smaller packs by force, and he's been stockpiling weapons in the eastern cellars." She paused. "I know because I'm the one who cleans those cellars. No one watches what they say around a wolfless Omega." Kael stared at her. "You've been invisible," he said, not with pity, with understanding. "Invisible things see everything," Sable replied. The king stood. He crossed the space between them in 2 steps and knelt the Alpha King on his knees, in front of her. His hands found hers, wrapping around her cold fingers with a heat that felt like it could melt the entire northern winter. "Come with me," he said, "to the capital, as my mate." And Sable, who had survived 18 years by wanting nothing, looked into his gold eyes and wanted. "Yes," she said. The capital was called Ironhaven, and it hated her on sight. Sable had prepared herself for coldness. She had not prepared herself for the specific, surgical cruelty of a royal court that had spent decades perfecting the art of destruction without ever raising a claw. They arrived on the 5th day, riding through gates of black iron set into walls of gray stone that rose 50 feet from the valley floor. The Crown Pack's fortress was a living thing, part castle, part mountain, its corridors carved from the rock itself, lit by oil lamps that cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. Kael walked beside her, his hand at the small of her back, and the touch was both anchor and alarm. Every wolf they passed bowed to him. Every wolf they passed looked at Sable like she was something stuck to the bottom of a boot. The whispers started before they reached the great hall. Wolfless. The kings brought a wolfless Omega, a charity case from the northern reach. Does she even have a pack mark? She can't possibly be his mate. The bond requires a wolf. Someone's made a mistake. The king has lost his mind. Sable heard all of it. Shifter hearing was extraordinary. Hers was merely human, But cruelty doesn't need supernatural senses to be audible. It just needs to not care who hears. The great hall was vast, columned, dominated by a throne carved from a single block of obsidian. The court waited in rigid formation, nobles, advisors, generals, and at their center, a woman who made the air in the room contract, Lady Vera Ashcroft, Kael's former betrothed. She was everything Sable was not. Tall, silver-haired, lupin in her beauty, with ice-blue eyes that could have frozen the ashen mere twice over. Her wolf, Sable could feel it like a cold wind, was enormous, powerful, radiating dominance. She wore a gown of midnight silk, and the way she stood, centered, poised, positioned between the throne and the court, told Sable everything she needed to know about who had been running this kingdom in Kael's absence. "My king," Vera said, her voice like polished marble, "we feared the worst." Her eyes slid to Sable, evaluated, dismissed. "And you've brought a guest." "My mate," Kael said. The silence that followed had weight. Sable felt it press against her from every direction, shock, outrage, disbelief, and from Vera something much colder, something calculated. "How wonderful," Vera said, and smiled. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in elegant brutality. Sable was given quarters, beautiful, isolated, far from Kael's wing. She was assigned attendants who reported every detail to Vera. She was dressed in gowns that fit poorly, seated at dinners where no one spoke to her, invited to functions where she was displayed like evidence of the king's poor judgment. And always, the whispers. She can't shift. She can't feel the moon. She can't carry an alpha heir. Everyone knows wolfless women are barren. The bond is defective. She bewitched him. She's a northern spy. She's nothing. Sable endured it the way she'd endured everything, silently, completely, with the cracked lantern burning on her windowsill each night like a small defiance against the dark. She learned the architecture of Ironhaven by walking its corridors alone after midnight, when the court wolves slept and the hallways belonged to no one. She mapped the fortress in her mind, every passage, every locked door, every servant's stair. Because mapping was what you did when you had no territory of your own. You learned the territory of others. You made yourself useful to the geography even if the geography refused to make space for you. But the court wasn't the worst of it. Kael was pulling away. Not deliberately. She could see the struggle in him, the way his gold eyes sought hers across crowded rooms, the way his hand twitched toward her whenever they walked together, the way he lingered at her door each night like a man fighting a current. But the pressure was relentless. His council demanded he reject the bond. His generals questioned his judgment. Vera, with surgical patience, planted doubt after doubt about the bond's legitimacy, about Sable's origins, about what a wolfless queen would mean for the bloodline. And slowly, agonizingly, Kael began to listen. "The council has asked me to undergo a bond verification," he told her one evening, standing in her doorway, not coming inside. His face was a mask. "It's a formality." "No, it isn't," Sable said. He didn't deny it. The bond verification was an ancient ritual, a public ceremony where the mate bond was tested before the full court. If the bond was true, both wolves would respond. If one mate had no wolf, the bond would appear broken, illegitimate. Vera had engineered it perfectly. "You could refuse," Sable said. "I'm the king," Kael said, and the weight of the crown was audible in every syllable. "I can't refuse my own counsel." Sable looked at him, at the man who'd knelt before her in a canvas tent, whose fingers had trembled around hers, and saw the walls going up. The same walls she'd seen in every alpha who'd ever chosen pride over truth. "Then I'll go," she said, "before they make you send me away." Kael's gold eyes blazed. "I would never—" "You're already doing it," she said quietly. "You're just doing it slowly." She turned away, and her hand found the lantern on the windowsill. The cracked glass was warm from the flame inside, and its split light fell across the floor in two directions, one toward the door where the king stood, one toward the window that opened onto the dark. Kael left without another word. Sable sat in the fractured light and did not cry. She had given up crying years ago. It required a belief that someone might hear you, and she had never had reason to believe that. Instead, she held her mother's lantern and watched its two beams of light stretch across the cold stone floor. One reaching toward the door, one reaching toward the window, and thought about how some fractures don't weaken a thing. Some fractures just teach the light a new direction. The bond verification was held in the Hall of Moons. It was the oldest chamber in Ironhaven, a circular room carved from black granite, its domed ceiling open to the sky. Moonlight poured through the aperture like liquid silver, pooling on the stone floor where ancient runes had been etched into a circle wide enough for two wolves to stand side by side. The entire court was present. Nobles lined the curved walls, their faces lit by the cold light from above. The council stood on a raised dais, Vera among them, her silver hair gleaming, her expression carefully blank. Ronan stood to the left of the throne, his scarred face unreadable. Kael waited in the center of the circle. He had shifted, or partially shifted, his wolf barely contained beneath his human skin, gold eyes burning like twin suns. The alpha presence rolled off him in waves, pressing against everyone in the room, and Sable watched lesser wolves flinch and bow beneath the weight of it. She stood at the circle's edge, wearing the simplest dress she owned, her mother's lantern in her hands. The elder who presided, a white-haired woman with milky eyes and a voice like dry leaves, spoke the old words. Sable didn't hear most of them. She was watching Kael, and Kael was watching her, and between them, the bond hummed like a wire pulled taut. "Step into the circle," the elder said. Sable stepped. The moonlight hit her, and she felt nothing. No shift, no wolf rising to the surface, no transformation, just Sable, human, wolfless, standing in a pool of silver light with a cracked lantern and a heart full of something she'd never been allowed to name. The elder raised her hands. "Call your wolves," she intoned. Kael shifted. The transformation was violent, bone cracking, muscle reshaping, black fur erupting along his spine as his body surrendered to the wolf within. In seconds, the king was gone, and the black wolf stood in the moonlight, enormous, magnificent, his gold eyes fixed on Sable with an intensity that made the air vibrate. The court waited. Sable stood still. Nothing happened. A murmur rippled through the hall. Satisfaction from some, pity from others, triumph from one silver-haired figure on the dais. The elder's expression shifted toward something that looked like sorrow. "The bond cannot be verified," the elder began, and then the black wolf howled. It was not a sound. It was a force. The howl erupted from Kael's wolf like something that had been locked in a cage for 1,000 years, and it hit Sable's chest like a battering ram. The lantern in her hands flared, not the candle inside, but the glass itself, the crack blazing with golden light that shouldn't have been possible. Sable gasped. The hook behind her sternum, the one she'd felt in the ravine, the one that had pulled her toward him from the very first moment, detonated. And something answered. Not from within her body, not from any wolf she carried, from deeper, from the bond itself, from the place where two souls had been knitted together before either of them had drawn breath. The mate bond didn't need a wolf. It had never needed a wolf. It needed her. Light exploded from the rune circle. Sable didn't shift. She couldn't. But the moonlight wrapped around her like a living thing, silver threads spiraling up from the floor, and the entire hall of moons resonated with a frequency that made every wolf present drop to one knee. Not from Alpha Command, from something older. The bond made itself visible, a thread of pure gold stretching between Sable's chest and the black wolf's heart, pulsing with a light that matched the crack in her mother's lantern exactly. The elder stared. Her milky eyes went wide, and when she spoke, her voice shook. "The bond is true. More than true. It is firstborn. A primal bond. I have not seen one in 200 years. Silence. Then Vera moved. She descended from the dais with a speed that betrayed her composure, her ice-blue eyes blazing. "This is impossible. She has no wolf. A primal bond requires nothing from us," the elder said, her voice suddenly iron. "It predates packs. It predates ranks. It predates the very wolves we carry. This woman is the king's mate by a law older than your ambition. Lady Ashcroft." Vera's composure shattered. In its place, Sable saw what had always been beneath. Desperation, fury, and the cornered viciousness of a wolf that had just lost its kill. "She's nothing," Vera snarled. "A wolfless stray from a backwater pack." "She is your queen," Kael said. He had shifted back, standing in the moonlight, human again, blood on his lip where the transformation had been too fast. He stood beside Sable, and his hand found hers, and his fingers did not tremble this time. "She is your queen," he repeated, and the Alpha Command hit the room like a tidal wave. Every wolf bowed, every head dropped, except Sable's, because the command didn't touch her. It never had. She was the only one who stood beside him by choice, and in that choice, in the simple, unglamorous act of standing upright because she wanted to, not because biology or hierarchy demanded it, lay a power that no wolf, no Alpha Command, no ancient bloodline could replicate. The power of a woman who had been told her entire life that she was nothing, who had believed it sometimes, who had let it hollow her out in the dark hours before dawn, and who had decided, despite everything, to keep standing. To keep saving what others left to die. To keep lighting a cracked lantern in the dark, not because anyone had asked her to, but because the dark was there, and someone had to answer it. The conspiracy unraveled in the days that followed, and it was uglier than anyone had imagined. Vera had not acted alone. The ambush in the northern reach, the one that had nearly killed Kael and his 15 guards, had been orchestrated by a coalition that included Gregor Thorn of the Silverpine Pack, 3 northern border alphas, and Vera herself. The goal had been simple: kill the king in the storm, blame rogue wolves, and install Vera as regent with Thorn's military backing. A bloodless coup disguised as a tragedy. Sable had ruined it by doing the one thing no one had accounted for, caring about dying wolves in a blizzard. The intelligence she'd provided, the weapons in the Silverpine cellars, the moved border markers, the absorbed packs, became the foundation of the Crown Pack's investigation. Ronan led the raids personally, and within a week, the conspiracy's infrastructure was dismantled, its participants in chains. Sable watched none of it. She had seen enough violence in her life, the casual, grinding violence of neglect and contempt, and she had no appetite for the dramatic kind. Instead, she sat in the infirmary with the 15 wolves she'd saved. They were healing. The gray wolf with the broken leg, a beta named Callum, had shifted back and was walking with a crutch, his gruff face softened by something that looked suspiciously like devotion whenever Sable entered the room. The juvenile pup, a girl named Wren who was 12 and furious about it, had attached herself to Sable with a ferocity that bordered on imprinting. She followed Sable everywhere, talked constantly, and had a gift for asking exactly the questions that Sable had spent her life avoiding. "Did it hurt?" Wren asked one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the infirmary floor while Sable changed bandages. "Being wolfless?" Sable paused. She considered lying, the kind, easy lie she'd told herself for years. "It's fine. You adapt. You survive." "Every day," she said instead. "Not because of what I couldn't do, because of how they treated me for it." Wren was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached up and took Sable's hand. "They were wrong," she said, with the absolute certainty of someone too young to have learned that certainty is dangerous. Sable squeezed her hand and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be more true than what a 12-year-old had just declared. The simplicity of it, they were wrong, cut through years of carefully constructed defenses like a blade through frost. All the rationalization Sable had built, all the walls she'd erected to explain away the cruelty, all the stories she'd told herself about deserving it, or at least understanding it, they dissolved in the face of a child's clear-eyed moral certainty. Wrong was wrong. It didn't need context. It didn't need nuance. It just needed someone brave enough to name it. Kael found her that evening, standing on the east balcony of the fortress, watching the sun set over the valley. The sky was a bruise of orange and purple, and the wind carried the scent of pine and melting snow. The first thaw of a winter that had lasted too long. "Vera's been exiled," he said, leaning against the balcony beside her. "Thorns in the fortress cells. The council has formally recognized our bond." Sable nodded. "You're not celebrating," he observed. "I don't know how," she said honestly. "I've never had anything worth celebrating." Kael turned to face her. The sunset caught his gold eyes and set them burning, and Sable thought, as she had every day since the ravine, that he was the most beautiful and most dangerous thing she had ever seen. "I owe you an apology," he said. Sable waited. "I let them get to me. The council, Vera, the court, I let their doubt become my doubt. I knew what you were to me. I knew it in the ravine, the second you put your hands on me, and I still—" He stopped, swallowed. "I still made you feel like you had to earn something that was already yours." Sable looked at him for a long time. The wind moved through her hair, and the last light of the day painted everything in gold. "You did," she said. "And it hurt." Kael flinched. "But," Sable continued, "I didn't survive 18 years of being nothing to fall apart the first time someone treated me like I was everything and then got scared." She reached out and touched the place on his side where her bone needle stitches had left a scar. "You're not the first wound I've mended, Kael, but you're the first one who apologized for bleeding on me." He let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his lungs for weeks. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to survive alone again," he said. "Don't promise me the rest of your life," Sable said. "Promise me tomorrow. I've learned to work in increments." Kael smiled, a real smile, rare and devastating, the kind that transformed his face from something carved and commanding into something warm and almost boyish, and took her hand. His grip was firm but not possessive, and Sable noted the difference with the precision of someone who had catalogued every type of touch she'd ever received. Grabbing, shoving, dragging, ignoring. This was none of those things. This was an offering, an open hand, waiting to be met. "Tomorrow," he said. and every tomorrow after that until you tell me to stop." Sable didn't say it back. She didn't need to. The bond between them, golden, primal, older than language, pulsed once, warm and steady. And that was enough. Spring came to Ironhaven like a held breath finally released. The snow retreated up the mountains, leaving the valley green and raw, and the river Ashenmere broke free of its ice with a sound like cannon fire that echoed through the fortress for 3 days. Wildflowers appeared in the cracks of the courtyard stones, tiny, stubborn things, purple and white, pushing through granite because nothing had told them they couldn't. Sable noticed them first. She noticed everything that was small and stubborn and determined to exist in places that hadn't been designed for growing. 3 months had passed since the Hall of Moons, and in that time, the kingdom had begun, slowly, painfully, to change. The wolfless laws were the first to go. Kael had proposed them. Sable had written them. Not grand declarations of equality. She didn't trust grand declarations, but quiet, specific reforms. Wolfless individuals could not be denied shelter during storms. Wolfless individuals must be included in pack census counts. Wolfless individuals had the right to petition for grievances without a ranked wolf to speak for them. Small things, incremental things. The kind of things that changed the world not with a roar, but with a whisper. The court adjusted. Some adapted with grace. Ronan, who had taken to calling Sable "my queen," with an emphasis that dared anyone to disagree. Callum and the other healed guards, who had formed an unofficial protective ring around her that was excessive and unnecessary and deeply touching. Wren, who had been formally fostered into the Crown Pack at Sable's request, and was already terrorizing the training yard with a combination of fearlessness and strategic brilliance that made the weapons master weep. Others adapted less gracefully, and Sable let them. She had learned long ago that you couldn't force people to see you. You could only stand in the light long enough that ignoring you became harder than acknowledging you. She stood in the light now. The Queen's balcony overlooked the eastern valley, and every morning Sable stood there with her mother's lantern and watched the sun rise. She didn't light it anymore. The days were long enough now, but she kept it with her always, the crack in the glass catching the dawn light and splitting it into 2 beams. 2 kinds of light from one source, broken and whole at the same time. Like her. Kael found her there this morning, as he did every morning. He moved quietly for a man his size, but Sable always knew, not from sound, not from scent, but from the bond, which registered his presence like a compass finding north. "The northern delegation arrives today," he said, standing beside her. His hand found the small of her back, and the touch was warm and sure and exactly the right amount of pressure. They were still learning each other, still mapping the territory of a relationship that had started in a snowstorm and survived a coup. But the learning was good, hard sometimes, honest always. "I know," Sable said. "Thorn's former territories have elected a new alpha, a woman named Marin. She's young, progressive. She's requested a private audience with you specifically." Sable raised an eyebrow. "With me?" Apparently, she was one of the wolfless children in the Silverpine Pack. She manifested her wolf late, after your reforms reached the north. She says you changed her life. Sable was quiet for a moment. The sunrise painted the valley in layers of gold and rose, and somewhere below she could hear Wren laughing in the training yard, a bright, unguarded sound that Sable had come to think of as the most hopeful noise in the world. "I didn't change anything," Sable said. "I just didn't let things die." Kael looked at her, really looked, with those gold eyes that saw everything, that had seen her from the very beginning, even when she was invisible to the rest of the world. "That's the same thing," he said. Sable lifted her mother's lantern to the light. The cracked glass blazed, splitting the sunrise into two beams, one golden, one pale. And for the first time, she didn't see the crack as damage. She saw it as a door, a place where the light got in, a place where the light got out. Every crack was an opening, every fracture was a passage. The lantern had been thrown against a wall by a man who couldn't bear what it illuminated, and it had survived, not by being unbreakable, but by being broken in exactly the right way. The light that came through the crack was not less than the light that came through the glass. It was different, sharper, more specific. It knew where it was going because it had only one path, and it took that path with the fierce, focused brilliance of something that had earned its direction. She set the lantern on the balcony railing, where it caught the morning sun, and threw its fractured light across the stone floor in patterns that looked, if you tilted your head just right, like two wolves running side by side. "Come on," she said to the king. "We have work to do." Kael took her hand. The bond pulsed once, golden, steady, sure, and together they walked into the light. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Thousands of viewers have been moved by tales of strength, love, and healing just like this one. If you felt something, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the moment Sable found the black wolf in the ravine? The Hall of Moon's revelation? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that being different doesn't mean being less. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story. New tales drop every week. And trust me, the next one will leave you breathless. Like, share, subscribe.